April 7th, the temple soldiers. Luke chapter 22, verses 47 to 53, and 63 to 65. While Jesus was still speaking, there came a crowd, and a man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with our sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the priests and the officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour, and the power of darkness." Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. The betrayer was, in the darkest sense, a man possessed. Satan entered into Judas, chapter 22, verse 3. Now we see public evidence. Not content merely to inform against Jesus, after all, Judas needed only to tell the authorities he'd be in the Garden of Gethsemane. We see him now leading men with blazing torches and members of the temple guard. And yes, although it seems almost beyond credibility, here too are the chief priests and members of the Sanhedrin. They are creatures of the night in every regard. Jesus, however, does not see his life in merely horizontal, historical terms, as though these men are acting entirely on their own initiative. He sees the visible in the light of the invisible. There is a yet more powerful and sinister enemy at work. "This is your hour," he says to the mob. But it is even more so the hour of the power of darkness. Verse 53. He is now entering the final phase in his lifelong conflict with the evil one. The temple guard take Jesus to the official residence of the high priest. We should take careful note of what they do. They play a cruel game of blind man's buff with him. In this case, it is given an especially cynical twist. Here they are playing blind prophet's buff. Prophesy. Who is it that struck you? Verse 65. Yet planted deep within these hours lies a variety of clues to how and by whom God's first promise of redemption in Genesis 3:15 will be fulfilled. Among them is the promise of Moses. "The Lord said to me, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him." Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 17 to 18. Jesus was that prophet. But his own people did not believe him when he prophesied. And now they trivialize his ministry in their callous game, pushing him around, slapping him and beating him. They shout at him, "If you really are a prophet, tell us who's hitting you now." They pour humiliation on him. No one comes to his defense. Jesus stands before them, the divine seer, whom they blindfold. He is the one on whose lips are God's words, yet they slap him on the mouth. He is the prophet promised by Moses, but they are too blind to recognize him. And they do not realize that even in doing this, the prophecies concerning this prophet are being fulfilled. "The Lord God has given me the tongue of those who are taught, that I may know how to sustain with a word him who is weary. Morning by morning he awakens my ear to hear as those who are taught. The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious. I turned not backward. I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting." Isaiah chapter 50, verses 4 to 6. For Jesus the prophet is also the suffering servant, whose portrait Isaiah painted so vividly. He is now drinking the cup he has taken from his Father's hands in Gethsemane. And as we watch this happening, how ought we to respond? We stand in silence, in wonder, in faith, and worship. today's reflection. These events are simply another violent episode in human history, unless we understand what God was doing in them. For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. Reread this section in Luke, pausing periodically to remember that it was all for your sake. This devotional series is being produced with the kind permission of the Good Book Company. A link to the book To Seek and to Save by Sinclair Ferguson can be found in the description below.